Welcome to today's Explainer. So let's jump right in. We're looking at a pretty dangerous illusion today. It's this widespread assumption that a diplomatic ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz means, an immediate return to normal operations. You read the headlines, peace is declared, and everyone just assumes the crisis is completely over, right? Well, for the people actually managing our global supply chains, especially the port managers stationed out in the Persian Gulf, that assumption is literally as far from the truth as it gets. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why the end of the conflict is actually just the start of an absolute logistical nightmare.
Because it all comes down to this $1 million question. When the ceasefire comes, does the strait reopen? Most people, and honestly even a lot of eager energy traders watching their screens, assume that the very second a peace deal gets signed, the oil flows and traffic just magically resumes. They picture these commercial agreements effortlessly wiping away physical blockades, and suddenly massive container ships are moving through the waterway again without skipping a single beat.
But actually, that is just not how it works. Not even close. You really can't just restart one of the most critical maritime choke points on the planet with the stroke of a pen on a diplomatic treaty. For the logistics operators on the ground, a ceasefire is really just permission. It's permission to finally begin the incredibly arduous, highly dangerous, and extremely time-consuming process of making that waterway both physically and commercially viable again.
And the real timeline we're dealing with here, it's staggering. We aren't talking about a few days or even a couple of weeks. It could realistically take 4 to 6 months after a ceasefire is officially signed before the waterway is actually commercially safe to transit. I mean, put yourself in a port manager's shoes for a second. You've got vessels piling up, schedules are completely shredded, and you have to look your clients in the eye and say, well, it might be half a year before your anchored ships can safely move up to our docks. So what exactly is causing this massive delay?
Let's look at the first major hurdle in Section 1, clearing the hidden threat, which focuses on the massive naval mine problem.
Right, so naval mines deployed during the conflict absolutely have to be cleared first, and mine clearance is just about the slowest, most technically demanding job out there. Let's say 0 weeks is when the ceasefire is signed. Now, optimistically, if there's full Iranian cooperation, specifically from the IRGC, and multinational clearance teams can actually coordinate, we are looking at 8 to 14 weeks. But realistically, if they have to work blind without that cooperation, it pushes the delay way up to 16 to 24 weeks. There is your 4 to 6 month window right there. And for a logistics coordinator trying to plan port arrivals, a variable window of 2 to 6 months is an absolute scheduling disaster. And the crucial thing to remember here is that diplomatic agreements don't always line up with military reality. We actually have historical precedent for this. Think back to the Sanmar Herald incident. During past tensions, the IRGC actually fired on the Sanmar Herald even after clearance was supposedly granted. This just goes to show that the diplomatic channel is saying the water is clear, and the military forces acting on the ground, they don't always agree. Because of this, commercial clearance teams are going to be extremely hesitant to rush their work. They know that a single miscommunication could quite literally be deadly. Niels Haupt, from the shipping giant Hapag-Lloyd, actually hit the nail on the head with a pretty stark warning about this. He said, "When the war is officially over, that does not mean the war is over for logistics. We will see hundreds of ships wanting to call at key ports in the Persian Gulf. The disruption will continue." And that right there is the core of our explainer today. The end of the military hostilities is the exact moment the logistics hostilities begin.
Which brings us to Section 2, shattered infrastructure and bureaucracy, or basically the port manager's daily reality. Port operators are facing an absolute avalanche of compounding logistical hurdles. First off, you've got real physical infrastructure that needs repairing. The Fujairah pipeline terminal has taken physical damage. The Safine Prestige, which was struck while just sitting at anchor, requires this massive damage assessment and salvage operation. And obviously, you can't berth ships at broken docks. But beyond the twisted steel and concrete, there is a giant bureaucratic nightmare waiting. Insurance underwriters have to entirely redesignate their listed areas. Protection and indemnity coverage needs to be painstakingly reinstated for literally thousands of vessels. And then there's the human element. You have to rebuild a ship captain's confidence to physically sail their crew back into the street. You can't force the captain into those waters if they don't feel it's safe, no matter what the port schedule says. And that leads directly into Section 3, the logistics reopening crunch, which is essentially a cascading failure at the ports. Imagine being a port manager staring down this 4-step nightmare. Step 1, during the closure, ships divert all the way around Africa or just drop anchor in the Indian Ocean to wait it out. Step 2,
Months later, the strait is finally cleared and officially reopens. Great, right? Well, step 3 is the killer. All of those hundreds of diverted vessels, plus the ones that were just waiting at anchor, suddenly converge on your Gulf ports at the exact same time. Which leads to step 4, berth wait times that completely shatter previous records. The congestion is going to be off the charts. We're talking about ships waiting weeks just to pull up to a newly repaired dock. Honestly, the wait times could easily exceed anything we saw during the actual military closure itself. So what this creates is a really profound, almost jarring disconnect between public perception and reality. On one side, you have the ceasefire. Global headlines are declaring peace, politicians are taking their victory laps, and the public generally thinks the crisis is totally solved. But on the flip side, you have the long tail. Severe energy supply disruptions drag on for months because the ports are totally choked, the infrastructure is battered, and the global supply chain is basically trying to swallow a watermelon through a garden hose.
Let's zoom out and look at what this means for a major global importer like China. Every extra week of delayed reopening, every single week a tanker sits stuck in that relentless port congestion line, means desperately drawing down their strategic reserves. It means paying exorbitant premium prices for alternative barrels just to keep their vast industrial economy chugging along. So a port logistics failure in the Persian Gulf? That translates directly into massive economic strain on the completely opposite side of the planet. And this brings us to a really sobering number, 2027. Because of this massive cascading logistical failure, the epic port congestion, the infrastructure repairs, and the huge insurance backlog, normal operations might not actually return until 2027. It just goes to show that planning for the long tail of a crisis matters so much more than simply cheering for a ceasefire. A ceasefire is really just an announcement. The actual recovery takes years of grinding, totally unglamorous logistical work.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to wrap up today's explainer. A ceasefire might be signed tomorrow, but is the global supply chain actually ready for 2027? The crisis absolutely isn't over when the guns stop. For port managers, logistics coordinators, and really the entire global supply chain, the real battle to keep the world running is only just beginning. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this complex issue today. Keep seeking out the reality behind the headlines, and I'll catch next time.